Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? So it's really weird not to be at the sanctuary. So if I reflexively throw like scratch grains or something at you, I apologize. It's just muscle memory. I can't do anything about it. So yeah, Hope covered kind of what I do. So I won't talk too much about myself, but here's some links to our pages and stuff like that. So I want to start off with a story. Helen was what's called in the industry a broiler chicken. She's one of the large meat breed chickens that are raised by the billions every year and slaughtered at about 6 weeks old. And she was actually one of the parent stock. So she was one of the breeder birds who gives birth to the babies who are then killed at 6 weeks old. And on her way to slaughter, like many other birds, she fell out of the truck, landed on the concrete, and was lying on the side of the road, dead or alive, with several other dead chickens who had fallen out of the truck. So lucky for her, a vegan couple on their way to a protest saw them and stopped and started reaching out to the vegan rescue community trying to figure out what to do because they had no idea what to do with chickens. I got a call Saturday morning saying, "We found this chicken, can you please come help?" 2 hours later, I'm sitting in the vet's office. Helen had a compound fractured wing, a broken femur, dislocations almost anywhere that you could possibly have a dislocation. Just an unimaginable pain and stress. And working with our vet, we looked at each other and said, we've got to give her a shot. She's survived this much. So that night, I was there till 11 o'clock, actually working, helping to keep her alive as they did surgery on her wing. And she came to our sanctuary and lived for 5 days before, unfortunately, we believe she had a pulmonary embolism from the fractured femur and died. But during that time, she got to look outside of a window for the first time. She had blueberries and other treats that, we think nothing of, giving to our companion animals for the first time in her life. For those 5 days, she knew what it was to be loved and to have affection. Now, she was coming out of what most of us call factory farming, and I won't use that word because I don't like the term, but industrial farming does that to billions and billions and billions of individuals just like Helen, causing suffering and harm in myriad ways. But we all know that already. Does anybody here think factory farming, industrial farming is a good idea? No? Okay, great. So, it's pretty obvious that the modern industrial farming system has tons of problems. You can ask almost anybody in the street, if you show them a video or talk to them about it, it doesn't take long to convince them. So what's been happening more and more over recent years is the public outcry for the abuses and horrors of industrial farming have led to farmers coming up with more humane methods of giving birth to, using, and killing animals. The notion that you can humanely, nicely, lovingly objectify, commodify, and destroy another being is the humane myth. So I know not everybody is necessarily familiar with the humane myth. There are some great resources that have been being developed over the past few years by humanemyth.org. Also, humanefacts.org have really good information on the general issues around humane animal husbandry. But the problem is that a lot of animal rights activists and vegans buy the myth as well. So, as long as as long as your meat is humanely raised, that's fine. Or as long as, you're getting the eggs from your backyard chickens, that's okay. But what I'm hoping to do today is to convince you that that's not the case. So let me talk a little bit about a few examples of the humane myth in practice. So this is a dairy farm. If you're not familiar with what all these things are, there's my pointer. Those are calf hutches. So as you probably know, in order for a mama cow to lactate, she has to give birth to a calf. She's not going to give milk otherwise. That's why dairy cows are constantly impregnated and their babies are stolen from them, so that they can constantly produce milk. Well, what happens to those babies? On industrial farms, you get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those, which are the female calves in these tiny hutches kept on a chain barely able, to walk their own distance. But on a humane dairy farm, the biology isn't different. In order for a happy cow to make milk, she has to be impregnated. And if the farmer wants that milk, the calf cannot have it. So you find those hutches on family, small-scale dairy farms as well. And just to give you an example, this is actually a picture I took driving home. This place is about 10 minutes from my house. It's a multi-generational family dairy farm. If you notice this road right here, on one side are the adult female cows out in the pasture having a happy old life. Over here in this building, that's where all their babies are. So they can see each other, they can hear each other, but they can't touch each other. They can't snuggle, they can't do the normal things that a mother and a child would do. And that highway, if that's not a better metaphor for animal agriculture, I don't know what is. So, and I drive by that all the time, and just is a constant reminder that no matter how happy you think it is, dairy depends upon, breaking the bond between a mother and a child. And then we all know, of course, what happens to the male calves. And you also see that with other species as well. This is Nestor. He was a baby goat who was born blind on a goat dairy farm. The dairy farm was humane certified, animal welfare approved, like very small scale. I think it was maybe on like 2 acres. Well, when he was born, being blind, his mother rejected him. And the farmer, because he was special needs, kind of got attached to him and reached out to rescues to take him in. And that's nice, and Nestor has a happy life now at a sanctuary, but that same family posts recipes for kid meat on their personal pages. So, you have to recognize that dairy is deeply problematic because of what happens to the mothers and to the children, and that's true on every single scale. Eggs also are a big part of like the humane agriculture movement, and a lot of people, like on the vegetarian side of things, if the animals aren't dying, then for the flesh, then it's okay. What these are 2 examples of industrial scale egg farms. So that's the battery cage farm. This is a free-range, cage-free egg farm. If you want to know some things about that, find me afterwards. I don't have time to talk, but yeah. So obviously, those are both kind of terrifying. So the answer to that you're finding in the humane, world, and everybody who wants happy eggs, are these small-scale family-owned egg farms. This is such a farm in Michigan. These pictures were taken by my colleague, Rachel Hipp, who went out on a documentation and attempted rescue mission. So this is a happy egg farm, family-run, super small scale, organic, cage-free, all the labels that you know and love. Well, hens start to decline their egg productivity at about 18 months to 24 months, and they start at about 6 months to lay eggs, and a year later their productivity starts to decline. Well, obviously that's not as economically viable for a farmer, and so so for even the humane happy egg farms that are operating on like a larger scale than just you in a backyard, all those less productive hens are not worth keeping around. So what they did was they took all those hens, 18 months old, put them in a truck and sent them to basically a landfill after killing a bunch of them on site. And so this is what you find: chickens who fell out of the dump trucks and were being run over by trucks at the landfill. And yes, in some places it's legal to dump animals at a landfill. And that's a happy family egg farm. So you can often find in the egg industry other scales. So this is what you would call like a pastured egg farm. And then this, of course, is like somebody set up in somebody's backyard. And I'm going to talk a lot more about chickens and eggs, as you probably can guess. So, but just to kind of give you an example of some different scales and, of egg farming, all of these types of egg farming have one problem with the hens, which is that when they stop producing as many eggs, they become spent. This is Dulcinea, and this is Dido. They both came from one of the pastured egg farms that I just showed you, different farms, but that sort of a setup. They both have clipped beaks, like you would expect to find in an industrial farm. Dido was near death from emaciation and dehydration and parasite infestation when she was found on the side of the road. Dulcinea here was running around an interstate after escaping one of these farms. But they were both spent. They both would have escaped after escaping from the process of being loaded into a truck to take them to the slaughterhouse. And they were about 18 months old. This is Maple. I actually just rescued Maple earlier this week from a farm supply store that sells chicks. He was lethargic, getting trampled by the stronger chicks. And chicks are a couple of bucks. It's not worth treating them. So he would have died, in that bin if he had not been rescued. And we don't pay for animals, so he wasn't purchased. But he and a few others came from a feed store and with different injuries that weren't going to be treated because it's not worth spending the money on them. And then, of course, there's the issue of humane meat. And yes, there are lots of people pushing humane, happy meat these days. And, I don't know about you, but I don't even see how that conversation can happen. And just an example from some of our rescue work. So this is the ad that was placed on Craigslist for a pig named Kevin Bacon, because naming pigs after the things we eat is hilarious for some reason. But take a quick read of that. So basically what happened is Jermaine was purchased from, we named him Jermaine. He was purchased from an auction by a family that was kind of homesteading on a suburban property. And they got too attached to slaughter him. So instead of, keeping him and loving him after he had gotten attached to their family and they realized he had a personality, oh my God, they posted this out on Craigslist looking to recoup the $75 they spent on him. And whatever happened to him, doesn't matter. You could make little bacon babies, you can kill them and eat them, whatever. They just couldn't do it themselves. This is Jermaine now. He's the happiest, sweetest pig. He's like 200 pounds, so, but he's just super, super sweet. I mean, and it's so obvious that he wants to live. He's very happy with his pig friends. But to somebody else, he was only worth $75. And luckily, a group of people negotiated his release, and he was the family released him to us for him to live at our sanctuary. And so on the meat side of things, also, I mentioned Helen, the Cornish cross chicken. This is what a industrial meat chicken farm looks like. This is more of the setup that you find people running like in their backyard on the small scale. You notice the babies are cleaner, but they're about the same size, and they're probably going to be slaughtered in short order. Like I said, they get killed at 6 weeks of age. They're still peeping at that point. These are two meat breed chickens who live at our sanctuary. This is Clover. Clover we think, came from a parent stock farm and fell off a truck. His beak is clipped, so he has a hard time eating. And then this is Pumpkin. I caught Pumpkin on New Year's Eve, 2016. He was running around somebody's yard after we think he escaped from like a backyard farm. But he's a large breed, meat breed, like heritage breed chicken. He doesn't have the same mobility problems that like a Cornish does, but he's big and he would have been killed, as a youngster still for his meat. So if you've ever heard of slow growing broilers, they're kind of white versions of Pumpkin, and they also don't want to die. So just another comparison image. This is what a slaughterhouse line looks like. These are all spent laying hens. This is what it looks like on a small micro farm. You notice how similar those look, right? Those are killing cones. You grab the chicken by their feet, turn them upside down, stick them in, and you walk by with a knife. It only happens faster there. That's the only difference. They're still, they're still 18 months old. They're still, however old they are, they're not laying as many eggs as the farmer wants, and so the only use for them is that. So let me spend a few minutes talking about, kind of on a more theoretical level, about the problems with humane animal farming. So at the core of it, murder is murder. You cannot kill someone who does not want to die. There's no nice way to do that. You can come up with as many euphemisms and fancy terms as you want, and you can get labels for it, and you can get the USDA to buy into it, but it doesn't change the reality of the situation that you're taking the life of someone who wants to live. That's, at the heart of it, that's one of the most central things with humane animal farming that makes it garbage. Also, too, scale is irrelevant when it comes to practices that you find happening on these farms, whether obviously forcibly impregnating females and or minutely controlling the reproductive systems of other animals, stealing babies from mothers, disposing of worthless males, whether it's roosters, calves, goats, kids, there's always a worthless byproduct in these situations, and what happens to them is pretty terrifying. Overuse and underuse of medications. So a lot of people don't know that on organic farms, they cannot use antibiotics. So if you have a cow with, say, mastitis, which is very easily treatable with antibiotics, they cannot use that, so they'll just kill them. Very easily treatable situation. And on super small farms, if you have a sick chicken, why would you spend $100 going to a vet when you paid $2 for this chicken? Something you could very easily treat with medication. And of course, we all know about overusing antibiotics and stuff like that to increase growth. Physical mutilation. So as I showed you in those pictures, even on small farms, you have debeaking and disbudding of goats and other things that physically damage the bodies of the animals while they're being used and before they're killed. And then of course, killing, obviously. That still happens no matter what the scale is. So many defenses of humane animal farming rely on this sort of distinction that people buy into, whereas factory farming, which is bad, and small-scale farming, which is nice, we like that because we think of beautiful bucolic family farms and rolling hills and happy animals and lots of other shit like that doesn't actually happen. But that's the image that culturally we want to buy into, because we want to believe that farmers are the salt of the earth and that they know how to care for their animals, and that even though they're producing a product, they have the animal's best interests at heart. And that's what the humane myth relies on. But the point that I'm trying to drive home is that scale does not matter in questions of using animals. So, we talk about you can't humanely kill someone who does not want to die, and farmers want you to believe that because they're doing it on the small scale, it's somehow more humane. But the issue is that murder isn't only reprehensible when it's genocide, right? We think about murder in human terms, in terms of violence against one individual. Why don't we think that way about animals as well? We can focus on the 9 billion animals who are killed every year in the animal agriculture industry, but doesn't it really only matter when we think about it in terms of the experiences of every single one of those individual animals? And that's why it's always wrong. And then just talking a little bit more about issues of scale and why scale isn't really the determining factor. Cage-free egg farms, humane milk, what makes them bad is not about how many of animals they harm every year, but about the fact that they're causing harm, period. So the backyard chicken flocks and micro farms, they all rely upon exploitation of animal bodies, no matter what the animals are used for. And how many of you are familiar with what these are? Just out of curiosity, a couple. These are what are called chicken tractors. We'll come back to that in a few minutes, but these are used very widely by people who keep backyard chickens for eggs. Like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. And then the problems with humane animal farming, I mean, obviously killing is harmful and violent, but the humane myth is about much more than just slaughter. Whether it's eggs, cheese, milk, honey, almost any animal product, you can find someone doing it humanely as a way to kind of market their products as better than the industrial version. And in every case, humans are benefiting by exploiting the bodies and the very DNA of animals who cannot consent. And then, to me, one thing that I find, I think the whole notion of humane animal husbandry really begs the question, well, why do we need it to be humane anyway? As soon as you ask that question, you realize that you're running into a paradox that the industry can't answer. Like, if an animal has interests and doesn't want to suffer, then why are we causing them harm and violence and killing them at all? I mean, isn't that the best in their interest if we're thinking about their interests? But obviously, that's not where humane farmers want to go with it. And so some important terms to keep in mind when confronting this movement in animal agriculture is that they love to throw around terms like honor and respect and compassion and other nonsense that makes you believe that the animals are getting the best possible life that they could have. It relies upon a narrative of sincere respect by farmers for the animals that they're raising for food. So you'll often hear the statement like, I treat my animals like they're my own kids. And I'm glad I'm not in that family, but I'm just, like my family has issues, but that's not one of them. So, but I mean, that's like the image that they give you, right? It's that like their kids are cuddling with animals and everybody's rolling around and it's so happy and the animals are just like dogs and they're part of the family, but then they only have one bad day. So, like this is a picture from our sanctuary. This is Hypatia. She's our oldest hen, by the way. She's about 9 years old. She's an Easter egger breed. And she, every now and then, will hop up on my shoulder just to remind me that she's in charge. Whereas this, it looks kind of sweet and nice, a kid holding a chicken. Then, of course, you see that, and you realize, oh, wait a minute, So, but this is supposed to be compassionate, and this is supposed to be, well, at least they're not in a factory farm. So, ignore the text for just a minute. Just look at the image. That could come right out of a sanctuary, right? Like, just imagine that she's vegan, and this little, baby was rescued from a farm, and they're going to have an amazing life. But then, actually, no, wait, it's the ethical butcher. This is Meredith Lee. Her book is called The Ethical Meat Handbook. She refers to herself sometimes as the ethical butcher. And she actually lives in Asheville, North Carolina, in my state. And so I got to know Meredith, not directly, thank God, but indirectly when I took part in a campaign in 2016 to stop a DIY butchering class that a homesteading school called Wild Abundance in Asheville was putting on. This is a statement from the owner of Wild Abundance. So let me just read this because you'll understand. The animal will be tethered, and when all the students are here, we are going to pray. Then we are going to wait for the moment that feels right and take the animal's life. So if you just kind of focus on the second half of that, so they're going to pray, and when the moment feels right, and the stars are aligned, and the animal is ready to give his or her life, we're going to kill them. You do notice that first part, right? The animal will be tethered. That should warn you that something's not right here. So the humane myth says that animals and humans are in harmony. Prayer, moment feels right, when the animals are the ones who die. This is not honoring. That's domination. This is Natalie honoring a sheep. And so Hope, who kindly introduced me, has a fantastic book that I highly recommend called The Ultimate Betrayal. And Hope, I'm sorry for stealing your word, but it's such a good description of what humane husbandry really is. It's the ultimate betrayal of everything that we have bred domesticated animals to be. So think about it this way. Animals used for food have been domesticated for roughly 10,000 years or so. So what the domestication process entails is breeding animals who are not only more productive than their wild ancestors, but also more docile and controllable. So therefore, they respond to humans. And they're more easy for us to kind of control and to interact with than a wild animal, because if a wild animal sees us, they're just going to take off because they're smart. Humane animal farming thus creates a relationship of trust and dependence that is ultimately a ploy. So all the pictures like Meredith, cuddling with the goat or the baby goat and stuff like that, like that's what they're getting you to buy into, is this notion that these animals are part of the family. They're not just commodities. They're not just, a bunch of little, animals running around in a barn. They're loved. They have a wonderful life. They're, and they're treated like the farmer's own kids. So think about this. We breed creatures who come to rely on us and trust us so that we may more easily steal their babies, steal their secretions, and slit their throats. So let me go back to this. So imagine this sheep was humanely, happily raised on a sheep farm by Natalie or another farmer just like Natalie or Meredith, anyone you want to think of. So what happens is that over the course of the time that they're raised from babies, the farmer works with them, gains their trust, becomes a source of food, of care, of comfort, to this animal who sees the farmer as, a member of their family, and sees them as a source of positive things. Then that one bad day happens, and this source of trust and love walks up, grabs them, throws them on the ground, ties them up, and slits their throat. They know who they are when that happens. The animals know who that is when that moment happens. And the humane myth, anything that is positively said about it, falls apart for me in realizing how emotionally traumatic and how much of a betrayal that is by that farmer who intentionally takes an animal that they have caused to love and trust them, throws them on the ground, and slits their throat. And we all understand that animals form emotional bonds with each other and with us. Anybody who has a dog or cat understands that. Sheep, chickens, goats, cows, pigs, they're no different. We've bred them to respond to us in the exact same way that we've bred dogs and cats to respond to us. So imagine how much of a betrayal it is to that animal when that farmer, that person who has been, their caregiver, does that to them. I find that so deeply disturbing that I can't even, I can't even entertain the notion that humane animal husbandry is better for animals, because that's so offensive. So this is your ethical meat. This is Meredith, whom we just saw cuddling the baby and, looking like she's a sanctuary and a happy farmer. This is what humane husbandry is. It's a betrayal of that animal who trusted her. So, sorry, I know that's heavy, but so when we're thinking about the issues of ethics with humane animal farming, we have to, the stuff that I've been talking about is really like conditions of treatment and stuff like that we experience on these farms. But we have to realize that the real ethical heart of the matter is not in how the animals are treated, and the conditions that they live in, and whether or not they live in a cage or in a pasture. Like that's all really on the level of aesthetics, and aesthetics are not ethics. We have to get deeper and into the heart of this, and to understand really why, at its heart, all forms of animal exploitation are violence and oppression and are wrong. And at the heart of it, it really centers on the fact that you cannot honor another being by using and killing them. There's no way to do that that's okay. And so what I want to talk about now is some of the other consequences of commodification of domesticated animals that really aren't directly spoken to by going to a farm and looking at the living conditions of the animals and stuff like that, but that are directly related to the property status of these animals and the relegating them to the status of food that is essentially what all forms of animal agriculture depends upon. So this is BB. We rescued BB from, she was a hatching project chick. So are you all familiar with hatching projects? They do them in schools where the kids will buy like a dozen eggs from a farmer and they'll incubate them and they'll hatch them, and then they really don't know what to do with them. So, but BB was hatched along with as a group of a dozen chicks on a small alternative school in our area. Well, eight of the chicks end up being boys, so they went back to the farmer, and you know what happened there. But BB and her three sisters were living in one of those chicken tractors that I just showed you in the backyard of this school. Well, those chicken tractors are more or less paper mache to predators. And so one night, a raccoon broke into the chicken tractor and systematically killed BB's three sisters and was in the process of killing her when the woman who lives there heard the ruckus, ran out and chased the raccoon off. So the beak damage you see here, that's not because she was debeaked. That's from a raccoon biting her beak off. So when they contacted us, the reason that they contacted us was because she was basically catatonic. She wouldn't go back into the chicken tractor because I'm sure you can understand why. So she would sleep in the tree at night, and then during the day, she would come into the yard and stand in front of their sliding glass door. And I think because of the reflection, she had lost all of her sisters, and the only thing that she had for companionship was her reflection in that mirror, or in the glass of that door. So we brought her to our sanctuary, and she spent several days just in our bathroom, almost immobile. And she started to come out of her shell when we introduced her to Hypatia, the chick, the hen who was on my shoulders before, and she started to know what companionship was again. So now she's the sassiest little hen you'll ever meet. She's bossy, and she realizes she's the queen of the yard. But what happened is that, yes, she was physically violated and put, almost killed, but you also realize the emotional damage that was done by the shattering of her bonds with her sisters and her brothers, obviously, who weren't even there any longer. So, even on a backyard scale, raising chickens for eggs relies upon shattering bonds that these animals have with each other and with us. And also, I cannot tell you how many sole survivors like BB we have at our sanctuary. Every chicken farmer backyard chicken person that I've ever encountered, as soon as you mention chickens, they want to start telling you about their fox stories or their raccoon stories or their dog stories. This happens all the time. And it's because it's not worth it to properly protect these chickens, and so they're just left to die, to be attacked by predators. So Beatrice, we took in Beatrice. When she was a couple of years old. She was an Easter chick who was hatched as as an Easter project and would have been raised for eggs, but she was surrendered to a rescue with her sister Coriander. In 2015, about a year or so after we took her in, she developed egg yolk peritonitis, which is probably the #1 killer of backyard hens. And it's resulting from the fact that we've taken an animal who should lay 10 to 15 eggs per year and bred them to lay 250 to 350 eggs per year. So increasing that 30 times, as you can imagine, it has some pretty horrifying impacts on the bodies of domesticated laying hens. So this was just one syringe of fluid that was pulled out of her body when she had egg yolk peritonitis. And in addition to that, because hens need to use the calcium in their bones to make eggshells, she had severe osteoporosis. Our vet said you shouldn't pick her up if you can help it. That's how fragile she was. We treated her for the peritonitis, and we implanted her so that we stopped her ovulation. And within a year, that osteoporosis had completely reversed, and the peritonitis had went away, and she was, we thought, the picture of health. Well, in July 2017, she suddenly got sick and died. She had been carrying around this. This was about the size of a softball inside of her abdomen before we even took her into our sanctuary. So for 2.5 years, she was walking around with this crammed in her oviduct. That's all cooked egg material. If you know anyone who eats eggs, that's exactly what they're eating. And what happened is, and this happens all the time with hens, is because one of the complications of laying that many eggs is that happens when the egg material gets impacted in their oviduct, it cooks, and it keeps getting more and more packed. And what happens eventually is that will get infected, and it will cause the chicken to go septic and die from infection and septicemia. So we had no idea that was happening. Bibi was the picture of health, Beatrice was, but because they hide illness so well, we had no idea she even had that going on. And we do like the most vet care that you can possibly. We do everything we can for our chickens in terms of vet care. So the reason I mention all that is because this is extremely common in laying hens. And so all the people who have backyard flocks love to tell you how happy their hens are and how healthy they are. The problem is that they may all be walking around with that stuff and you just don't know. But it's so common that I'm guessing that the vast majority of them are. And this is actually from an industry publication talking about the prevalence of death from egg-related laying problems. And then, in addition, obviously, to the problems that come with hens, the biological problems that hens live with every day as a result of domestication, there's the rooster problem. So Chanticleer was a rooster living in somebody's yard. He was crowing too much, so they tried to use hair ties to restrict his crowing ability. He came to the rescue like that. The alchemists were a group of originally 9 roosters who were dumped on the side of a road near us. 2 were killed that night by predators. The 7 remaining I caught over the course of about 2 weeks, and they all live at our sanctuary now. But rooster dumping is a pastime for backyard and small-scale egg farmers because they can't or don't want to keep the roosters. And if they don't have the stomach to kill them outright, they dump them in the woods thinking that they can live a happy life there, and they can't. Chickens are not wild animals. They have no business living in the woods of North Carolina. So what this all really boils down to is, so sorry, I have to talk about these guys because they're so cool. So this is Fouquet. He's a rooster who was dumped in the woods, and I caught after about 5 hours of effort to catch him and another rooster who were dumped in the woods. This is Bazarov. He came into a shelter, and oops, sorry. So that's building trust and building relationships right there. But at the foundation of all these forms of animal exploitation lies speciesism, the belief that humans are superior to other animal species and therefore have a right to do what we wish with them. Now, the humane myth, I believe, reveals this in a way that industrial farming doesn't. Because with industrial farming, it's so easy to get caught up in the aesthetics and the outright forms of cruelty that you never even get to those deeper questions about domestication and problems with use and exploitation that are inherent in the bodies of and the practices of using animals for food. But at the heart of it is this impunity from that we have to do whatever we want with commodities, and that includes animals we have deemed to be commodities because we want to eat them. But in reality, if anything we do devalues or degrades their autonomy, and we benefit with no actual necessity, it cannot be ethical or humane and relies upon the biases of speciesism that says humans are superior and we get to do what we want. So let me just say this really quickly. When we're thinking about that problem of using animals, building trust with animals, and then killing them, a point that I want to drive home is in the act of slaughter, that an animal farmer enacts upon an animal, I believe that anything that they have done before then, no matter how much cuddling they did, no matter what it is, all becomes irrelevant in the moment that they restrain and kill that animal. Because in that moment where she is being killed by someone she trusts, the only thing that matters to her is that she does not want to die. Everything that went before that is irrelevant, both ethically and I believe in the moment for her, it does not matter. And so that is what I want to drive home in that process of use and disposing. Nothing that comes before it is relevant because it all leads to that moment. Whether it's you're speaking biologically and all the problems that come with being domesticated for production, or in the process of how they're treated and thrown away when they're not useful anymore, everything before that is irrelevant because that's the heart of the issue. And so, we can have relationships with animals that don't rely upon commodifying them and disposing of them. This is a picture I got of a rooster who was dumped in a state park. He was sleeping on top of a parking sign in the sleet and cold of winter. This is him now. That's Frost. And that's what I mean is these animals build relationships with us. They respond to kindness. They want to be treated well. And the thought of taking Frost, holding him on the ground, and slitting his throat, I can't even put into words. But that's exactly what humane farmers do. So I think it's important that we really cultivate empathy and we think about the experiences of the animals instead of the particularities of the farm and the farmer and the consumers who want these products. So I love this quote: "All beings tremble before violence, all fear death, all love life. See yourself and others, then whom can you hurt? What harm can you do?" If we think about it in that respect, and if we keep the interests of the animals in our minds and our hearts, there is no form of animal exploitation that we can ethically support. And the only thing that we can do is to go vegan and to promote veganism. And I think you should rescue animals too, but to get out of it. And is the moment that we grow our demands for no form of exploitation being okay, then we can end it. And that's the only thing that we can do to do right by these animals. Thank you.